All right. We're still, it's 12 a.m., 12 p.m., but we are waiting for people to join in. All right. Who's that? Jen. All right.
Jen, hey, how are you? Hey, Haley.
Hey, Jen, how are you? I'm good, I'm good. Hey, I'm still really interested in looking at the different tags and like categories for different services. Is that still something you might be able to get your hands on from your system?
You're breaking up a little, Haley. Would you say you're still interested in what now?
Oh, let's see, the tags, like the different categories and tags for the services in your system. Like, how do I say this? You know what I mean? So I would love to look at those and just kind of see how you guys organize and categorize things. Just to, more. It's familiarizing myself.
And you mean Bread for the City, or are you talking about?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'd be happy to send it to you.
Oh, that'd be great. Thanks.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Charles.
Hi there, Greg.
How's it going?
It's good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad that we are seemingly getting everyone on this call. It always takes a few minutes, but this time we're actually gonna record this one and actually post it like we always intend to. But something tends to always go wrong, so this time high stakes. While we're waiting for the last few people to join us, I'm gonna chat this document here. We can again take notes in this doc.
Oh boy. Well, I gotta change conference rooms.
Oh, okay. And I'm going to ask for someone to be note taker.
Greg, I can do it.
The last meeting went long, and I just didn't even check on this. We're gonna grab a coffee in a second.
That makes sense. Right, that's the premise. That's where it gets.
Mike. Mike, it sounds like, it doesn't look like you're muted, but I was not able to hear you. You might not have audio on yours.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. There we go. All right. Sophia's on. Okay. We got 5 of y'all. Let's give it another. While we're waiting for, we'll give people a few more minutes. I haven't heard anybody saying they're having trouble. So, but does anybody else want to throw things out there while we're waiting for folks to join that you would like to discuss during the hour? I know that I saw some emails bouncing around over the last hour or so. So maybe we can talk about some of that stuff. But anything else that people want to talk about? You don't have to speak it. You can get into the document and type it if you wish. And I'll share that document again. Great. All right. Give it just a couple more minutes, maybe just 1 or 2. Let's see. So to refresh while we're waiting for folks, there were a few issues that came up last time in our last conversation, mostly sort of procedural issues. We discussed about the need for sort of complementary approaches around the CSV core model. Discussed the need for, first of all, format specifications, which is a phrase that I've been using, and I think it seems to resonate with folks. So format specifications for JSON, XML, etc. And then profiles of particular subdomains. We sort of recognize that both of those are necessary angles of development that should be potentially happening in tandem with the open referral models development, although we have yet to really spell out the process by which something becomes like a part of the open referral standard if it's developed by a member of the community, part of the pilot project, like what's the process by which that happens in a way that ensures interoperability. We didn't go so far as to spell that out, but it did come up. And we also discussed the question of how distributed updates from a network of different organizations that are aggregating and publishing this information might actually work. And that's much more of a question for a question for the pilot projects who are trying to figure that out themselves. But there was some sense that the work that's happening on the linked data project in AIRS very well could be an important complement to the open referral model to help enable that sort of distributed update system. And then we had some discussion about those parallel tracks of the AIRS linked data vocabulary and the open referral model, and how we believe that these are complementary approaches that should be developed in some sort of cooperation. So that's generally what we talked about last time. I think we are still waiting for some other folks, but we might as well get started. I think everyone on here knows each other pretty much, except Charles is again a welcome newcomer. So Charles, go ahead and introduce yourself to the folks here.
Hi, my name is Charles Koppelman-Milstein. I work at Polaris, which is an anti-human trafficking organization. We have a lot of very specialized uses for service providers, referring them to. We run the National Human Trafficking Resource Center hotline, which takes calls from around the country and refers people who are victims of trafficking to all sorts of help, whether that's law enforcement or shelters or anything, or extraction services or anything like that that they need. And we're also working with global partners. So we also have some challenges representing global data on that end. And with all of that comes a good amount of security that we care about too. So I've been doing web development for about let's say about 10 years or so, and this starting in October has been my first foray into the social services sector. Although I've done a lot of other cause-based development in the past. That's me.
Cool.
Hi, and I'm very excited about data structures.
Okay, great. So let's have everyone else introduce yourselves just briefly so that Charles and we all have a sense of who you are and where you are, and then we can jump in. I'm going to just call you all out. Haley, can you join us, or are you still on mute doing other things?
No, I'm here. I'm
Okay,
listening.
great.
And welcome, Charles. It's wonderful to hear about who you are and what you've been up to and why you're interested in the movement. And wow, I also really like data structures, by the way. So let's see, a little bit about me. I am totally self-taught when it comes to data and things, but I have worked really closely with developing and deploying data standards for different populations. So I work for the state. My main area of my domain is emergency medical services, so public health. And oh, that's a cool tattoo. And what I've done is look at national data standards and local data standards and different data systems that are being used by counties, hospitals, regions, and states, and the country to answer different questions and how to exchange data between those systems, how to move, like how to make data standards harmonized between those systems, because everybody has different data needs. So they have to, using the same standard can be difficult, and so everybody, likes to add their little flavor to things. So I have a lot of experience kind of sitting down with all the stakeholders and talking about, okay, how are we gonna set these data standards up? So, and you guys, I have some really quick news. The last couple of weeks, I've been learning JavaScript, and I totally built my first app with D3, and it's interactive, and it's a huge barrier breakthrough for me. So I'm really excited about it. I might be a coder.
Congrats! Yay!
I'm sorry to hear that.
I love it. I love it. So that's my
Great.
thing. I can ramble on forever. I can.
Thanks, Haley. Let's get quick introductions from everybody else, and much appreciated. Although we definitely want to move into some conversation. So let's hear from others. I see Kat Dwyer just joined. Kat, can you hear us? Kat, when you can chat in the right-hand corner if you're having trouble with audio, but we'll go around other introductions and hopefully we'll hear from you in a sec. All right, Jen, go ahead. Tell us.
I am Jen Stowe. I'm the organizer for Open Referral in DC. I have a background in fundraising communications, and I previously was with Bread for the City, which is now one of our champion stakeholders in DC. And I'm new to the data world, but excited about consuming all of this info.
Hi, Mike.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
I'm Michael Ubell. I'm a database management developer for about 35 plus years.
new to social services and referral, but interested due to some community groups I'm working with in Oakland. And I'm just trying to help where I can. I've been traveling for a while, so I haven't really reviewed the documents lately, but maybe I'll get up to speed in the next week or so.
Great. Kat, I'll give you one more check-in. Can we hear? Oh, wait, she's not in a quiet place. She doesn't want to turn her mic on. She's a consultant who works with a lot of INRs on database management, also works with social service organizations on quality assurance and workflow. Thanks, Kat. We also have the Google Doc where we're taking notes on this conversation. It is, I'm going to put it into that chat box so you can see it there. I also added, I copy and pasted Sophia's email from the group to the group yesterday, rounding up all the different issues that have been brought up, including the link to the spreadsheet where she's been collating those issues and the responses. And with that, Sophia, go ahead and introduce yourself. And if you want, since we haven't heard others sort of with burning issues to put on the agenda, go ahead and kick us off. Give us a summary of where things are and what how you would like to use this time with some subject matter experts and pilot project organizers on the call. We also have the Google Doc where we're taking notes on this conversation. Oh. I'm going to put it into that chat box so you can see it there. Is that what it sounds like?
I'm getting an echo back here. Hold on.
From the group to the group yesterday, rounding up all the different. Oh, we lost Sophia, who is.
Oh no.
Clearly in some sort of time delay. Chris, I see you just joined us while Sophia tries to get back on. Go ahead and introduce yourself, if you can. Maybe she can't.
Okay, I'm back.
Hi, this is Chris. Back. Can everyone hear me?
Sophia, pause for a moment. We'll hear from Chris real quick. Go ahead, Chris. Chris, go ahead. So we lost Chris for a minute, but Neil just chimed in that he is watching, so he's not in the chat with us, but he's watching, and he'll be able to leave questions if things come up. Sophia, go ahead, take it away.
Okay, I'm Sophia. I actually started this whole thing, and basically I've been collating a lot of the spec to begin with. And so we put out version 0.1, and we had received about 56 comments or so within the past couple of weeks. And so I put them together in the spreadsheet. There's a couple of, beyond formatting issues, there's a couple of larger issues that I've sent emails on, which is modeling services and locations and how we do it. There's a couple of different ways of doing it. And just want to kind of, in order for clarity for us to move on, we're sort of still at the stage of we're trying to get agreement on all the terms and what to call them and what they actually mean. So we're in this controlled vocabulary type situation. And then from then we can move on to actually just modeling the relationships and making something a little bit more operational or something that can be used rather than just having sort of these defining these terms. So there are a couple of issues there that that we put, and the primary ones were, one is how do we handle scheduling, or how do we format scheduling. I put out an email on that. It's a little bit more in depth, and also the discussion, we've started getting some more discussion on how do we handle services and locations together. There's some other minor ones that I put them together. And let me pull this document out.
I'm just going to note those. There's scheduling and services / locations.
Mm-hmm.
Did anybody else notice while Sophia's pouring through issues that you'd like to discuss while we're all able to see some of our faces? you're not able to chat, you can, if you're not able to talk, you can leave a message either in the notes or in this chat column on the right. So, Sophia, are you looking up other stuff, or should I start inventing questions?
Go ahead. Go ahead and talk and whatever issues you want to go forward with.
Okay.
Just looking at the other stuff here right now.
Cool. So, I would like to think through a little bit about how, unless people are interested in particular aspects of the spec, which we could use the time to talk through, I'd like to think through a little bit how the rubber hits the road and how this actually gets implemented in DC and the Bay Area. What the people on the ground are actually going to need, and what we might need from them during this final phase of developing the specification. So that's me. Chris is also here listening in. Chris, I was just asking, popping a question with you and Jen in mind in terms of folks on the ground who actually have to take this data model and do something with it. And so if you have questions to sort of make that a little bit more specific, please do chat them into the box or leave them in the notes. Okay. I'm hearing silence from y'all. I assume everybody's just reading the specification really carefully and is totally absorbed in these comments. But if anybody has something to throw out, like.
I have a question that I'm not entirely sure how to word.
Great. I love those.
It seems like there's a lot of the discussions are sort of, a lot of the discussions in the comments are sort of the difference between the content that's easy to produce / for a human to read and consume, and the content that a computer can do a lot with. And I'm wondering which of those is really the end goal of the group.
The end goal is really for humans, because we're looking at a lot of organizations that don't have people who are programming, but they may have somebody who can run a database, who can run a bunch of SQL scripts and import them into a system. So we're basically, well, I've said this before, and since you're new, what we're modeling this over is the Google's generic transport feed specification, or GTFS. And GTFS is a set of CSV files that are interrelated and that you can use and have been used to pretty much deliver applications, and people build things around it. Like 511.org, a lot of the bus routing apps have been built around that particular specification. And so it's a very simple, easy way for people to be able to take data and also build something directly from it and use it to their own needs. Now, not everything is going to be necessary for that, so that's great. People can pick and choose the parts that they need for a particular application. The idea is to also make it simple enough that you can actually put it in a table, and while this makes a lot of people who run databases very squeamish, somebody can actually edit the stuff in Google Docs, a spreadsheet, that kind of thing. So we're trying to get to the lowest common denominator, the lowest possible barrier for people to be able to get to this data, use it, and ingest it, and also modify it.
Okay. So that sort of functionality is the trade-off there is that it makes the data becomes less understandable by machines, but more understandable by a person who's just creating it, and it's easier to do. So you get more data, and you get a little bit less analysis unless you start using crazy things like, language understanding.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
Yeah, there's a trade-off between a certain complexity and representing. Like, why not use things as put everything in Unix time for data entries? Well, that's great and all if somebody knows what Unix time is, and it's but a lot of people don't. They'll just see a random string of numbers, and they're like, "What is this?" Well, it's when this particular piece of data was created. So, kind of erring on the side of something that is somewhere between that lies between using a standard way of doing things. So, big proponent of reusing standards such as ISO 8601 for time type stuff, and getting it to the point of something that's so random that most people don't understand what it is.
Cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. It's a fine line to walk.
Mm-hmm.
So, Sophia, to clarify, well, Charles asked, is the trade-off that the data is easy for humans to consume but harder for machines to analyze? And you basically said there is, that's the trade-off?
I don't think that it's harder for machines to particularly analyze. Mm-hmm. I think that as you get to very specific things, I think Charles made some great recommendations in terms of using, ISO codes for languages, levels of proficiency based upon several other standards. I think those are great if there's a particular situation for it. And that level of analysis would be, it is great in terms of, giving somebody this information or being able to analyze the ability of an organization to provide a certain service in a certain language. Okay, so that in that particular use case. However, I think in practice, what you're going to see is somebody is just going to look up this use case and say, well, do you have a speaker who speaks, who speaks Tongan? Well, I'm using an example from California, and it's like, well, do you have a Tongan speaker? Well, no, but there is, a language line that they can get to. So those are the kind of like on-the-ground things that people are looking for, not specifically for things like, well, what's their level of language fluency? Can they read or write? That kind of thing. I think that's useful, but but at a practical operational level, I think that's something that tends to be pushed aside.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can I chime in real quick?
Sure.
It sounds like a great case for a new type of user story. Not necessarily new users, but maybe a different thing that one of our users would like to do, and something that we could put on for a next iteration type of thing down the road.
So if I can clarify a little bit, there were folks here who weren't at the workshop. We went through a process of hearing from different types of users, looking specifically at 4 different types, which are all very broad categories that contain all kinds of, whole realms of subtypes. But generally, we were looking at this problem from the perspective of a help seeker, from the perspective of a help provider, from the perspective of a researcher who's trying to understand, this data in the aggregate, and finally from the perspective of a database administrator, which could be anyone from, iCarol's tech guy to the person at the food pantry who keeps a spreadsheet of the places they refer people to. Both would be database administration. And if I'm understanding Haley and her suggestion here is that, this is the kind of question that we can put in that context of, as a database administrator, I want to do blank in order to blank. Is that correct, Haley?
Yeah, it is, because the thing is, we have there's so many things that these data standards need to help us do. And we really can't do all of them at once, and so the question becomes, well, how do we prioritize? And then, how do we know when we've been successful with our current episode? And so by the concept of the user story, when you put it all together, we can say, okay, the user story we're aiming for with this iteration is we want people to be able to, or who have access to the internet, to be able to go online and search for a service in their area related to getting food on Wednesdays and Thursdays. And then maybe we have a list of 5 things or so we want these folks to be able to do. And then when we created our data standard, we started using it, then we put different people in front of a computer, and we see if they can accomplish those goals. And then we can say with some level of confidence, okay, we've done what we wanted to do. Now, what's next? What's the next user story we want to develop for?
That's great, Haley. And it sort of does remind me that we developed all those user stories, and some of them were really rich. A lot of them were a little bit broad, but this may be a good time, and it may be a good task for the work group, with some support from myself and others, to go through those user stories, maybe specifically for the purpose of evaluating some of these trickier issues that have come up, and say, given these user stories that we heard come out of this workshop, what's the way we want to resolve this?
That sounds great, because I hear what Sophia is saying, and what we should be cautious of is, having better be the enemy of the good, and just lost my train of thought. But I think that we have to have a way of setting our priorities, and it's a really nice way to be able, we can reconcile each feature of our data standard that we have in our current version, be able to reconcile that with different user stories is very helpful, because we have to, when we're looking at different features to add to the standard, we've got to look at how much value versus how feasible is this. And so, and really in this early stages, we want to develop for the user stories that are the most feasible to deploy with the standard and the most valuable to the users. And there's going to need to be discussion among stakeholders to determine, okay, well, where in the scale of value do we feel this particular item falls, and that takes negotiation and things like that. Certainly, I don't think any single one of us would know, but that's kind of the fun part of the process. So that user story model might help us with this particular item. Where do we want this ability to look at languages? Where is that falling on our radar in terms of now, next, and later?
Great. So I think that may be a good frame for the rest of our time on this call. We have another week of this request for comment period, and then the idea is that the work group would take a week. It may actually end up being 2 because people will be on vacation during the last week of August. But what do we want to, given the comments that have been going so far, the work that we've done together to put our heads around this, what do we think should be addressed in the next couple of weeks? And if we can identify a few of those, then we can work to frame them within the process that we've laid out so far of developing user stories and so on. Anyone want to chime in? Or Sophia, do you want to put questions to us?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions there, and there's something that can be, they're like things like labels. Like the first one is, location has a property called travel. I think it used to be called public, or it used to be called transportation. Changed it to somebody requested that's a transportation that's too, was too vague, and I think Neil was one suggested move it, call it public transportation. And the idea behind the field, or meaning of the field or that property is that, this is there public transportation available to this place, to this location, and what are the means of getting there. It's a free text field, so it's kind of, we're not pointing in anything specific, but just we're asking the label, should we just call it travel or public transportation? I mean, I think public transportation is probably the more descriptive of the two.
Is regular transportation not an option for some reason? Because travel does seem a little potentially confusing, but public transportation also seems pretty urban focused.
Yeah, it used to be. It used to be just transportation. So I mean, I'm happy with it as transportation or public transportation either way. I think yes, it is urban focused in terms of public transportation. Kind of, I think this is something that is within AIRS. Within the AIRS XML schema, so I believe it was called transportation there. I have public transportation, somebody pick. I'm not, particularly. Either way, it conveys the meaning to me that that's how do you get there. I mean, if I were me, I would be more explicit. I would say something. I would put something like how to get to site or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Getting here.
It seems to be transportation. I mean, it could be that the service could provide a pickup, which is not public. In which case, transportation becomes more generic.
When I was reading the AIRS schema and I saw transportation, I thought that meant that the organization provides transportation elsewhere. That it was a transportation, part of their service offering was transportation to places, and that was confusing to me. So I think that might be a little too one word. But how to get here is great.
I was just thinking of that, how to get here, yeah.
It also occurs to me that we do have some people on the list who are specifically working on demand transportation and have piped up a couple times. So it might be something where I could at least float this particular discussion to them and see if we can get them to weigh in. Okay. This is caught in the notes. Or wait, how to get here. Let's make sure to put that in the notes. Other thoughts? Other issues that we could check in on while we're on the call, Sophia?
I had a thought on the location versus service discussion.
Mm-hmm.
If the location, rather than having, I think right now it's got a parent ID. Rather than having a parent ID, if it had a list of service IDs, then the service could refer to the location, and the location could refer back to the services that that were serviced at that location. Then you could go both ways.
Yeah, the original formulation of this, I thought when I looked at the actual design, it was having a joint support table between the two in order to enable that. I mean, it really comes down to how people want to model this, and I think within Ohana, for some reason, we went with the corner edge case rather than the more common case of a service has a single location. Because I guess we're trying to be more accommodating. My feeling is, or my preference is, that we make a call on it. There's two ways of doing it. Make a call on it and just say, a service has a location, and let all those location properties be subsumed under service. Or the way that, as Neil has pointed out, that in iCarol, both are top-level entities, but there is a joined entity. Otherwise, there are optional entity known as program at site in iCarol, and that basically allows them to put in join the two pieces of code, join the two entities, and allows different types of other information that they use. So that's another competing model of how it can be done. I don't know which one is the better one or which way would be more practical or useful, but I do know that right now that we should make a decision on how to handle this relationship between these two entities. So I mean, I think the two competing ones right now are to go ahead and have, well, there are three, which is one, the Ohana way, which is every location has a service or services. Then the way that more frequently commonly seen way is that each service has its own location, or the way that iCarol does it is that both service and location are top-level entities, and that they can be joined together to create a single entity with a service with a specific location, or a service or program at site is the term they call it. So I'll go kind of delineate those in the email a little bit more.
Any thoughts? Any thoughts on this, Kat? Is this something that you have a take on? I think Kat might be muted, but let us know in the chat box and I'll read it out. I had a question put to me over email that I encouraged the commenter to get in the doc and ask there, but I'm not sure if they did. The question was, who is going to assign the organization ID?
That is, you know, I mean, there are different schemes of doing this, and you know, the easiest way of having a universal ID, at least within the U.S. or within other places where they have taxing entities, is to use the FEIN or FIN number for organizations, and that is always going to be a unique identifier. Within this scope, within what I propose is a unique ID, and this is also that the idea is that this unique ID is just for managing relationships within this particular data set, is to use a UUID, which is essentially doesn't have that many collisions in terms of being able to generate them. That we could reuse those UIIDs among different sites, and I think that would be nice. But since this is sort of an operational question where we don't have we're not seeing like a central authority that actually issues these UIIDs and will maintain or enforce the reuse of them. So I have no idea in terms of how this would be implemented operationally. I'm just, within the spec, I'm suggesting using a UUID in order to manage the relationships between the different tables within the specification.
So I have two questions to that, but Haley, were you about to jump in?
Well, yeah, just to dovetail off what Sophia is saying, she's absolutely right. And one of the ways I think of it is when you're developing a database or a data system, then you have a rigid structure or a way of assigning UUIDs, usually, because that keeps your data clean. But when you're developing a data standard, what I've seen is folks set aside a place and make recommendations or say where the data or where the ID should come from or who should set it. But the role of the data standard isn't really to assign those numbers, from what I've seen.
I would agree.
Okay, so let me see if I can get my two questions straight here. What's the relationship between the FEIN and the UUID?
There's no relationship.
There's no relationship. Okay. So the FEIN is an organization's identifier according to the United States government. The UUID...
Yeah.
Right. The UUID is the organization's identifier according to this data set.
Yes.
And why not just use the FEIN? I mean, well, I guess this is actually my second question is, what do you then do for public agencies that don't have organizational identifiers? I mean, I suppose that's the reason why you can't just use FEIN is because we have governmental agencies in here that wouldn't have an FEIN.
Yeah, true.
Organizations reincorporate and change their controlling structure and merge and all sorts of other things. That it gets really complicated if you're just using a externally assigned ID.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, exactly.
Okay. I guess, I do have a thought here then. I know this is an issue that others are working on, the issue of organizational identifiers. In fact, I know of at least 2 other efforts to develop organizational identifiers for like all organizations, period. I'm not really sure how that, in our domain, we have the challenge of like I said, public agencies alongside non-governmental organizations. But it may be worth, on this particular issue, checking in to, what efforts to standardize organizational identifiers elsewhere are up to.
I would be really curious about that too, and I'll try to do a little research, but from my perspective, taking the activity of creating a standardized identifier for all organizations that could be part of the system is a totally separate project and process, which Open Referral may want to take on. Like I say, I think the idea of an organization registry is kind of sexy in my mind, but totally a different project.
Okay. That's a great answer. I can bring back to the person who asked, and I think it is in keeping with our answers on other hard questions such as eligibility and service type. So,
cool.
Any final thoughts on this one?
Yeah, the one final thought from a perspective that most people in this room don't share is that, Polaris deals with a lot of organizations that need to, for either safety, legal reasons, or some other reasons, really need to stay unknown by anybody but the people who are immediately using them or immediately referring to them. So these are organizations that wouldn't be comfortable being listed in any public resource whatsoever, not being shared with other organizations that they don't trust explicitly. So those sorts of organizations wouldn't be comfortable with a publicly registered ID, as far as I understand, unless it was sort of called something like private use or something like that. I don't know. But it would still be great to be able to, for us to develop tools to internally know about these organizations in this schema. Since, if this is the schema that we're going to be going with all of our publicly known organizations, we'd love to be able to use this tool set for non-publicly known organizations as well. And I'm wondering how any sort of ID system any sort of universal ID system would fit into this, except for something that's namespaced pretty well.
Yeah, I was about to suggest that we could go to namespaces, but I think that's a little bit extreme for most of these organizations. If we look at the AIR schema, there is actually a property there which says "do not publish" for a number of the different entities that are part of the XML schema there. So I mean, that's maybe one way to handle something like that, where you do want that information available to you, but not available to the public in general.
Oh, there's an easy way to. I understand doing that. It's just the ID conflict that I'm concerned about.
Yeah. I mean, and there are just either also there are so many cases where there are things like public services, for example. I mean, things like the little library where people just put out a box full of books outside. Well, I mean, that's certainly an interesting thing to have as a service, and knowing the locations of those things would be really great, but it's not really this organized thing, It's not being monitored by any organization or that kind of thing. So there are a lot of cases where there is actually no organization, and there is no real reason to put in a unique ID for it.
Also, Charles, what you're describing is, to me, such a fascinating use case by an organization, and I would love to learn more about it. And so, how can I do that?
Well, I just want to cut in here briefly. This actually did come up in the workshop. I want to hear Charles's final thoughts, but this emerged in the workshop as an important issue, and to my mind is one of the discoveries from that whole process was that it actually suggests that our approach to this in the future may need to expand to have a fifth use case, which is the organization to which someone is being referred.
I see it as a scenario from that organization user. So it didn't. Does that make sense? It's like a sub-case.
Currently we don't have that type in our domain. Right? We have help seeker, help provider, researcher, analyst, and this would be essentially a fifth type of use, which is organization being it. No, it's actually like it is fascinating that it emerged, and I think our take on it at this point is that we see that, and I think at the next workshop we very well may revisit it with some greater depth and make a decision to in the future spec actually come out and say we have to address these problems from that perspective as well. And so at this point our take would be we're aware of this and we want to learn as much as we can about it for some sort of future decision to potentially expand into that area of the problem as well. Charles?
Very good.
The only thing I wanted to say, Haley, was that we should take this offline if you want to talk more about it. I can tell you plenty, but I don't think it's worth everybody else's time right now.
Got it. Thanks.
Let's see. We had one question from Chris in the chat box. And it's about the program issue, which the issue of program was really the one potentially ambivalent and tricky issue as of the last time the work group got together. Sophia, do you want to give us an update on where that stands at the moment?
Really, from kind of looking at the discussion, the simplest way forward was to look at programs as a collection or a grouping of services. A program is a collection or grouping of services, and that program belongs to an organization. That's sort of where we are right now. Programs have their, essentially, for the way I understood it, and since I was sick at that meeting, I maybe have gotten it wrong, that programs were essentially administrative units, which you can bundle a number of services under that, and they funnel money to those particular services. I saw them from more of a, as like an administrative / funding type of, I don't want to use the word organization, but a program is is basically a collection that is bounded by, some administrative function, which is like all these programs are under, person X, or they're under the director of that, or they're funded through, whatever, if they're funded through a, federal grant, or a set of grants that's bundled under a single program. So kind of that's where I see it, and program itself was not like one of the things that people really searched for. In terms of people actually using the data, program wasn't the primary thing. Program was more for researchers to understand things such as efforts to outcomes from efforts, or efforts to outcomes, that kind of thing. So that's where I've left it. Essentially, a program is a collection of services. Why it is a collection is left open, whether it's an administrative thing, or is it a topical thing, such as primary health care for women, with children, breastfeeding with children, that kind of stuff. Why they're grouped together, we don't try to answer that. They're just grouped together because somebody says they're good.
Any thoughts on that?
+1 for sure. Yeah, spot on.
Great. I also had, if there's anybody else with comments on the program issue, go ahead. We had a couple of questions from our DC stakeholders for the last few minutes here. Right, they asked about the services program. Sophia, can you give us an overview of the issue of eligibility, where things are there?
We haven't really moved forward that much. I think that what we want to do is come up with a way that really help with somebody helping me classify different types of eligibility, because we have things based on age, based on national origin, race, gender, condition. So I need somebody to help me out on trying to put those into buckets, generic buckets that make sense. That would make sense operationally from a person trying to sort through this data. So I mean, if I'm basically I'm a homeless teen. How do I put that bucket together? It's a combination of A, homeless, B, age. So really looking for some assistance there on how we want to define eligibility, its characteristics, what kind of enumerations we're looking at.
So I have a couple of, to clarify a little bit, I think we have folks at Bread for the City and probably others who we could ask sort of frontline providers to see, like, how do you deal with this, or what are your important criteria, although we may get somewhat sort of like, we may get a bunch of particular sets of feedback that may or may not be generalizable. And so we could do that. I also know that there are other efforts out there to model eligibility. And I wonder if this, like the organization ID issue, is something where we can acknowledge, like, this is a problem space unto its own, and reach out to others who might be working on developing models for it, and potentially make our model alignable with other models so that you can plug and play. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. But just from the start, any suggestions on how to break, somebody has already provided a few ones, and I'd like just to see more examples of how people break up eligibility, or what are the eligibility criteria they're using to evaluate whether a person can be accepted into a program.
Okay. So let's make this another topic that we'll bring up. I'm not sure if we saw an email specifically about it, but this could be a good one to bring out from the assembly to bring to the group and sort of see what people say. And I can also then take it specifically to the people I know who've been working on modeling this and see where they're at. Maybe they have some documentation that would be useful for us.
Sophia,
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it would be a useful exercise for a useful use of anybody's time to just sort of create a Google Doc of some sort, or like a repository of different sorts of eligibility criteria?
That would be fantastic.
Okay.
All right, so we'll get this in the notes, and it'll be one of the things we come out. I think there was one last question. Jen, maybe you can clarify for me. Our stakeholders in DC have particular ways that they sort for whether an organization requires like a warm referral or some sort of like document written, and there were fields for I think application process or documents required, and I think they were asking about. Jen, are you able to clarify a little bit more what specifically came from that conversation about the applications required? Let's see.
Some were saying they were saying a lot of times there is what they call a firm referral required, which is actually like a sheet of paper with a signature from the organization that's giving that referral. I think they were asking where would that lie? Would that lie in the application process or the eligibility?
I mean, where does it lie with them? I mean, to me, I would essentially look at it in terms of eligibility. You're either in or out of the program based on somebody's decision, referral. So there's obviously an intake process, and that there's an intake process, and then they've been passed on to the next one. So I would say it's eligibility in terms of that person has to have some sort of sign off or has to have some sort of referral.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would fit well. I mean, just from a semantics and structure standpoint, it would fit well in eligibility. Something like, a key with a value of eligibility, or excuse me, application required, for example, or application approval required, or something like that.
Because there is a field for application process, and it seems almost as if this would fit within that. And I think they were just asking for clarification.
Yeah, I think the process was just was a description of what's the process for getting into this program. So you have to apply, you do it online, you have to be an in-person interview, that kind of thing.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's make it's a little past 1 o'clock, so I want to. I think this is an issue we'll try to follow back up on for some clarification. Dale, I see you just joined us just in time for us to leave.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
My time zone thing, it didn't work out. Sorry about that.
Oh, all right. We'll have to clarify for the future. Sorry we missed you, but you can read the notes. Anybody want to, any final thoughts or any things that you all want to address in the next week? Technically, next week we're going to be meeting to cap off the end of the request for comment period, so we're reaching the peak here. Any final thoughts before we jump off?
Just want to thank everybody for the comments and keep on pushing on it.
Okay.
Great.
Thanks
Thanks,
you
everyone.
for your hard work responding to everything.
Yes, thank you.
Welcome.
Great, y'all.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.